So we don't want to waste any time. Why don't we just jump in? Beth Enos is with us again. So let's just jump in where we left off and carry forward.
Okay. All right. Glad to see everybody this evening. I see some familiar faces from last week. So good to see you again. So I thought we'd just go back and just recap just a little of what we talked about last week. So that'll be a good segue into this evening. So last time I had talked a little bit about my history with Taoism and the Tao Te Ching, and I'd mentioned that one of the things that appealed to me when I first encountered it was sort of this combination of mysticism and practicality. And we focused a little bit more on the mysticism, or the mystical aspects of it last time. And we talked a little bit about how Tao, which means path or way, is sort of an unknowable sort of first principle. And by unknowable, what I mean is that it's unknowable with our rational, analytic minds. To the extent that we know it intuitively and experientially through our being. We talked about the connection between that mystical aspect of Taoism and the heritage of Christian mysticism as well. And we explored our discomfort a little bit with unknowing and uncertainty. And I mentioned a t-shirt that I have. I brought it tonight. I forgot to bring it last time. So this is my t-shirt that I was going to show you last time.
T-shirt, not t-shirt.
It's got these Chinese characters on it, and it means basically, I don't know either, or I also don't know, or I really don't know. It means something like that. And the last character, if I can get my hand behind it here, this last character right here is Dao. So Zhi Dao means to know. And so we have that concept in knowing and unknowing as well. So anyway, it's my favorite t-shirt. When I need to remind myself that I really don't know as much as I think I do, this is what I wear. We also acknowledged that we talked a little bit about the different branches of Taoism, that there is a branch of Taoism that we might recognize as being more familiar to us in the sense of having some of the trappings of religion with temples and priests and rituals and deities, but that the branch of Taoism that's more familiar to us in Western culture is the philosophical Taoism, which is what we really focused on last time. And the philosophical Taoism doesn't really have much of these trappings, right? You're not going to go find a temple. It doesn't really have deities. But it's more a sense of a way of life and how we engage with the world, how we think about the world and our place in it. And so that's kind of more of what my experience has been with Taoism. And we also spent a little bit of time with chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching and explored the mystery of knowing and not knowing, and desiring and not desiring, and naming and not naming, and all of that. So tonight, thought we're going to shift a little bit to the more practical application of Taoism. And Taoism doesn't have any creed or sort of required beliefs or rules of behavior, but it does have some basic principles. And so I thought we'd talk about some of those this evening and how they might apply in our lives. So there are three basic concepts that I'm going to talk about. There are others, but I think these are sort of the three main ones. Some of them you might have already encountered in one way or another. The first one is, in Chinese, it's called Wu Wei, and it literally means without acting or without action. And so it's often translated as non-action. And when we hear that translation, we think, oh, well, if I'm a Taoist, I'm just going to sit around all the time and do nothing. And then I'll be like super, super enlightened and show how serious I am with Taoism. But it doesn't really mean that in this particular context. And so one of the phrases that's repeated several times in the Tao Te Ching is, nothing is done, and yet nothing is left undone. So it sounds a little bit like a paradox. When you were talking about Buddhism, did you all talk about koans, sort of those little puzzles? This is a little bit like that, isn't it? Nothing is done, and yet nothing is left undone. So I thought I would just throw that out there and see if you can reconcile. It's not a test. It's not a right or wrong sort of thing. There's not a right answer. But it's like, when you hear that, how do you reconcile those two parts? Can you figure out a way to make those both work?
And you can unmute yourself at any time if you want
Sure.
to talk. And then when you're not talking, just mute yourself again so we don't have background noise.
Yep. Oh, it is a koan, isn't it? Did you talk about some of the ones like, the sound of one hand clapping, and what's another one? What did your face look like before your parents were born? Is that one? Those are the only two I think I remember.
Houston Smith was given by his teacher, does the dog have Buddha nature?
Here's another one.
So this goes with Wu Wei?
Yes.
So
Nothing is done, and yet nothing is left undone. So how do things that need to happen if we're not doing it?
the way accomplishes it, right?
Say that again?
The Tao accomplishes it somehow, or?
Yeah, that's one way of thinking about it. Like I said, there are a lot of ways we might sort of engage with that. But yes, the idea that I'm not doing, it's not so self-directed in the sense that I'm not deciding what I want to happen and then making it happen as much as I'm acting in accordance to the extent that action is appropriate or non-action, but that I'm acting in harmony with the circumstances that are in the present moment like that. So that what needs to happen does happen when we're sort of acting in that. I think of it as alignment in an aligned way. Somebody started to say something?
I was just going to say, so this would be like, for when we feel like every little thing that comes along needs a response from us, needs some sort of action by me, or otherwise it's not going to go right. And it's more of a kind of remembering to sometimes just let it go and go with the flow, and let a lot of things just work themselves out, even without me having to do anything.
Right, good, yeah. So thank you. Yeah, so you mentioned a phrase that I think is important, that go with the flow. Because sometimes when I talk about Taoism with people, they think, they'll say, oh, well, yeah, that's the religion, or that's the philosophy, is about just like go with the flow, just like whatever, whatever is happening. And I thought, not exactly. It's not like, oh, well, you know, everybody's I don't know, doing drugs. So I think I'll just go with the flow and I'll go do drugs too. Or, people are vandalizing things or, doing things that we wouldn't think of as being very aligned behavior. So am I going to go with the flow and go do that? No, it doesn't mean that. So when we think of go with the flow, we think of water, and water is one of the primary metaphors for Tao in the Tao Te Ching. So water's talked about a lot, and a lot of the characters that are used to describe Tao in the Tao Te Ching have water components in the Chinese character. Even if the character doesn't really literally mean water, it'll have a water aspect in the character of it. And so that's I'm so glad you used that phrase, because think about water and qualities of water and how water behaves. Water isn't really very self-directed, right? Water doesn't decide, I'm going to go do this. Water follows certain principles. So it follows principles of gravity, for example. So I have a cabin up at Mount Hood. It's right on Camp Creek. So I go and I sit by the creek a lot, and it's like flowing, right past me. Well, what makes it do that? It's flowing in accordance with gravity. It just follows the lay of the land, so to speak. And it also follows a particular channel. So it has banks, and it follows in this channel. Sometimes that channel changes. Since I've had the cabin, one time there was a lot of rain and then a lot of snow melt and everything, and the channel actually changed course. So the creek right in front of my cabin isn't exactly in the same channel as it was when I first bought the cabin, but the water still follows it, right? The water still follows whatever that channel is. So y'all remember that phrase, like people were wearing little plastic bracelets, WWJD, what would Jesus do? Do you remember that? So one time I mentioned last week that I have a twice monthly contemplation group on Taoism. So we all got little plastic bracelets that said, WWWD, what would water do? And we would think, like, if we had something we were really struggling with, we'd think about some of these principles of water and how would water behave, in this situation. And think about obstacles, right? Water goes around, over, or it just wears them down over time. But water doesn't force in that, in that sort of opposing, confrontational kind of way. So we can learn a lot from sitting by a creek and watching the water.
Well,
so
I want to ask about
sure.
a contemporary issue in a more Christian context, because what we're talking about reminds me of some of what's happened around COVID in America, because you had, when the pandemic first hit, you had a lot of people, including probably a lot of us and me, going, oh, we got to do everything we can. We got to put our masks on. We got to get our shots. We got to social distance, blah, blah, blah. And then there were people who were kind of resisting all that, going, oh, it's in God's hands. We're just going to let whatever happens. So, in some cases, that sort of attitude sounds more like the Tao sort of approach of this is not something I can control, so therefore I will let it go.
Any thoughts on that? Well, it reminds me of a couple of things. One thing is that water does what's appropriate in the circumstances, right? It follows certain patterns and channels. And so, I was thinking, well, as some of you know, I practice martial arts, and so I like to spar with people. And so it's like, well, how do you deal with force, coming in? And I used to think in my early days of sparring, I would get really banged up. I would be really bruised. And I think, oh, I am so badass. I mean, look at me. It's like I've got all these bruises. And I'm just like, I'm so tough. And I thought, let me think about that again. Maybe what that means is that I'm trying to meet force with force. It's not working out so well for me. Are there other ways to handle energy that's coming towards me in a way that is more compatible with that energy, leaves me still in an advantageous position, not harmed, but working with the energy rather than ignoring the energy, which is, I think, kind of maybe what you're suggesting, or fighting with the energy. So that's one thing I was thinking about. The other thing I was thinking about is a joke that you all may have heard about. I've heard it a couple of ways, but the way I mostly hear it is if there's a flood, and there's this flood. Sandra's nodding her head. She knows what I'm going to say. So, his house is flooding. He gets up on the roof, and he's going, "Oh God, please help me. I don't want to drown." And so these people come by in a boat. They said, "Hey, we'll help you. Come get in the boat." You go, "No, God's going to help me. I got this." And so the people in the boat leave. And then a helicopter comes over and they drop a ladder. And they say, "Climb up the ladder. We'll save you." And he's going, No, I've already prayed to God. I got this. Well, water rises and he drowns. And so he ends up in heaven, and he's a little angry at God. He's going, "Hey, I prayed to you. Why didn't you help me?" And God says, "Well, I sent you the people in the boat, and I sent you the helicopter." So maybe some like vaccinations and masks and some of those things are things that we're being given to help us through the challenging times. So that was the other thing I thought about that. Does that help? Yeah, okay. Good question. Because I think we're talking about practical application tonight. So these things that we're talking about, we need to figure out, how does this work? What does this look like in particular circumstances, either particular circumstances in my own life or broader circumstances? Yes, Robin.
So I've been hearing on a few different podcasts recently about the concept of calling people in instead of calling people out.
I haven't heard that.
And so, and it's been used around many topics, politics or, COVID, masking or not masking, or racial issues. And the idea being, instead of somebody says something really offensive and you just go head to head with them, like, "That's terrible. How can you say things like that?" Instead of that force to force, you do something that's more like, I'm surprised to hear that. Tell me more about how you came to that view, or give me some examples. I don't really get it. The idea of calling people into a conversation instead of going head to head against whatever they're saying when you obviously disagree.
Yeah. I love that phrase. I'm so glad that you call that to my attention. I hadn't heard it, but yeah, I really like that approach. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. All right. So that's one of our key concepts, is this Wu Wei or non-action. And I think about this as not so much not doing anything, but I think about it more in terms of alignment. Being in alignment with whatever my present circumstances are and acting appropriately in engagement with those circumstances, which might mean doing something. It might mean not doing something, but it means that sort of things are happening and I'm participating in them rather than I'm trying to decide something and make it or control it or make it happen according to, sort of what I've decided is right or wrong. Back to my t-shirt. I really don't know, right? That's a good reminder. So the next thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is Yin Yang, which we talked about last time. So here's the Yin Yang symbol, which many of us have seen in various contexts. And you may know something about the symbol, maybe you've never seen it before, but what are some things that you think about, or what kind of impressions do you get, or what can you observe about the symbol?
Well, it would appear that there are several opposites in colors and shapes, and yet they complement one another to make a whole.
Yeah, thank you, Diana. Yeah. What else?
And the opposites are in constant change, constant alternation.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. Yeah, so there's movement there, right? You get a sense of movement from this. Anything else?
I get a feeling of continuity in those shapes. Just the continuity of circumstances
Okay.
or life.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because you get a sense of cycle here, don't you, right? That one is
yes,
moving into the
definitely.
other, moving into the other, moving into the other. Right. Yeah. Thank you, Donna.
It's also
Yeah.
been observed that the black dot is like the citadel, the most important place in the white area, while the white dot is in some ways the central spot in the black area. So there's this incredible balance to it.
Yeah. So listen to some of the words you all are using, so there's sort of this this idea of opposites, but not opposites that are opposing each other, but opposites that are working together to create a whole. There's movement, there's balance. Each part has sort of the seed of the other part. Here's the seed of the white part that it becomes the white part. Here's the seed of the dark part that becomes then the dark part. When I look at this, I sometimes think about the solstices. So, when we come to the summer solstice, it's when we're going, oh, summer, this is great. And yet summer solstice is the day when the light begins to fade, right? So here we are entering summer and the light begins to fade. While the first day of winter, and we're going, oh my gosh, unless you're really, like you love winter, but some people have a little trouble with the dark season and the cold. But the first day of winter is the day that the light begins to return and the days start getting longer. So I think that's idea of solstice, that winter contains the return of the light, and that summer contains the return into the time of darkness and hibernation and waiting for the spring to come again. So I love that kind of aspect of this. And the idea that things exist in relationship, that everything exists not in isolation, but in relationship. And each thing is connected to other things and has parts of the other contained within it. It also reminds me of breathing, because, our breathing is a cycle that we have in our bodies. And one of the things that's very key to Taoism is the connection in our bodies. Taoism is a body, mind, spirit sort of philosophy. It doesn't sort of separate our spiritual sides from our physical sides, and our bodies reflect the harmony and balance in the universe. Internally, it reflects that. And so I think about breathing, where each breath, sort of flips into, if I'm inhaling, it sort of flips over into the exhale. And as the exhale ends, it begins the inhale. And here we have two very different, in some ways, processes of bringing in the oxygen and expelling, what we don't need, and yet they work in harmony together to keep us alive. So breathing is a very basic, I think, reflection of some of the principles that we see in the Yin Yang relationship. Anything else about this? Okay. So the next one I wanted to talk about, and we won't spend a whole lot of time on this unless, of course, you want to, but it's a little bit harder to sort of grasp. But in Chinese, it's ziran, and it means sort of self-so, or self as it is, or true nature, or essential nature, or basic nature, something just the way it is. And that comes up in the Tao Te Ching several times about how things act according to their nature. And this goes back to something that was said earlier about when we get in and when we interfere with something because maybe we're anxious about something, or we're upset about something, and so we try to make ourselves feel better by fixing whatever's out there that that's causing us some distress. And when you think about, we're at a time, in our world where we think so much about the environment and ecology and the balance in nature, and how sometimes even well-intentioned efforts, and I'm not talking about people, or companies that are, polluting or something like that, but even well-intentioned efforts can sometimes skew that balance in a way that has unforeseen consequences. I grew up in the South, in Memphis, and if you have spent much time in the South, you know what kudzu is. And so kudzu is this vine that was introduced, a non-native plant that was introduced to lessen erosion along highways and places like that. And so they plant this kudzu that just spreads, and what's happened is that kudzu has just taken over, and it grows up over trees and chokes them and kills them, and just you can't stop it. You just can't stop it. So I mean, there's an example of something that was meant to do good. It was meant to lessen the danger of erosion, and yet it caused its own set of problems. And I'm sure you can think of other examples like that as well. And so this ziran concept is really about kind of non-interference, and again goes back to sort of that Wu Wei, acting. It doesn't mean never doing anything, but acting in alignment and in harmony with our circumstances rather than trying to come in. And of course, what happens then when you come in and you introduce something even well-intentioned, well, then you have to fix it with something else, right? So now we're going to bring in something else, to eat the kudzu or whatever. And it creates its own problems. So we find ourselves in this management mode. We're trying to manage all the things now that we've sort of gotten out of balance. And it's like whack-a-mole, right? I'm going to fix this one with this, and now that makes something else pop up. And so that's sort of this concept of ziran, of sort of paying attention to what is the real nature and way that things are, and trying not to interfere so much with that. Any questions or comments on that one? Okay, all right then. So what I'd like to do is look at a passage that I think will give us a little more insight into how these concepts are sort of organized. I use that term loosely because there's not much in the way of organization in the Tao Te Ching. As a quick aside, Bruce Lee, who's of course one of my heroes, was very Taoist in his approach to martial arts. I mean, he was actually quite educated and very deep into Taoist thinking and philosophy. And if you read a lot of his writings, I'm sure many of you have, you'll see a lot of quotes from the Tao Te Ching and the way that he thinks about things. Anyway, one of the things he said was, you can't organize truth. It's like taking a pound of water in wrapping paper and trying to shape it. So when I started to describe this passage as sort of organizing, I thought, no, I need to use a different word. But anyway, so this is a passage from chapter 38, and I gave it to Kathy to put up on our screen here. There we go. All right, everybody see that? So you see that this is not the entire chapter 38. This is one passage from it, but I think it's very revealing about how everything sort of fits together. So you've got Tao, right? When Tao is lost, there's De. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about De. And I didn't say there's virtue, although De is often translated as virtue. But this is the De of the Tao Te Ching, right? So the text that we're looking at has 3 words in it. Tao, which is sometimes spelled T-A-O, as opposed to D-A-O, it's the same word. Tao, De, which is sometimes spelled T-E. Ching, which just means like a classic text. So there's Tao, there's De, and then Jing just means like a sacred or a classic text. All right, so when Tao is lost, there's De. When De is lost, there's kindness. When kindness is lost, there's justice. And when justice is lost, there's ritual. So one of the things I think is very telling about this passage is that a lot of us operate sort of on the level of kindness or justice. A lot of us work for social justice and believe in it, rightly so. But you can see that kindness and justice sort of come into play when we've already kind of moved down the ladder a little bit. Scott mentioned last time that I used to teach law at Lewis and Clark Law School, and I had all my law students read this passage the first day of class, and I had it up on my office door because I said, you're about to, embark on a profession that is devoted to justice. And that's a wonderful thing, but I want you to see where justice fits in the big scheme of things. So you might call it a hierarchy, but I think it's more of layers. I think of it more as layers than I think of it in terms of some kind of rigid hierarchy. And so I wanted to share a little bit with you about the characters for a couple of these terms, because I think the characters give us some insight into these terms. So Kathy, you can take that off the screen now. Thank you. And here's my whiteboard. Okay. So the first one is Tao, which we looked at last time. So I'm not going to spend much time with that one, but this is the character for Tao, which is also, like I said, on my t-shirt, and it means the way or the path. This is the character for De, and like I said, it's often translated as virtue, but many translators just don't translate it because when we see the word virtue in English, we think about morality in a way, or sort of, how we should behave in that kind of way. And when it's translated as virtue here, it doesn't mean virtue maybe in the way, for example, I think you probably talked about virtue a little bit when you were talking about Confucianism. It doesn't mean it quite the same way here. And I broke this character down because it's one of my favorite characters, and I know you're going to love it too. And when we break it down, it really gives us a lot of insight into what it means. So this part of the character, which is this part over here, means to go forward. So just to move forward. This part of the character is actually this top part here, but the rectangle has been turned sideways to make it fit into the character. So you have like a little plus sign on top of a rectangle with some lines in it there. Can everybody see that? And that part of the character means upright in the sense of straight, correct, aligned. So there you have that concept of alignment. And that also breaks down into this little plus sign, which is the number 10. And this, again, this little rectangle, which means eye, like the eye that you see with. So you have 10 eyes, which suggests deep vision, right? What all could you see if you had 10 eyes, right? So really clear, expansive, deep vision. And this last part means heart. So if we put it all together back over here with this character, it means, so think about this idea of virtue, right? But what does it mean here? It means going forward, guided by the inner vision of your heart. So that has a little bit deeper sense to it than what we might think of as virtue. And I think that's why sometimes the translators just don't even bother to translate it. But I think it gives us wonderful guidance. So going forward, guided by the inner vision of your heart. Okay. Next character here is kindness. This was a character that Confucius liked a lot and thought this was a very high virtue for people. It's also the character used for loving kindness, the concept of loving kindness in Buddhism. You have a person here, that's the little slant line with the line going down. That's a person. And then you have the two parallel lines here, which could mean a couple of things. It's the character for the number 2. So you have 2 people, basically, here. So 2 people, one's being kind to the other. It also kind of looks like hands reaching out. So here's one person reaching out their hands to somebody else, which could characterize kindness, right? So you notice there's no person in these first 2. So when we get down to kindness, we now introduce people, individual people. So now we have individual people acting kindly to each other. And this next one is justice. And I love this one because it has these 2 parts. This first part means sheep, right? Like the animal, the sheep, which is used in a lot of Chinese characters to mean something good. So when they have, it doesn't have anything, of course, justice doesn't mean sheep, right? But they use this sheep component in a lot of characters to suggest that something is good. They think highly of sheep. This character is the character for I, first person. So me. So notice the shift here between kindness and justice. Kindness, we have a person. But in justice now, we have me. Me with something good, right? The sheep. And so this introduces, I think, the concept of the ego here. Because now I'm thinking of it from my own perspective. What's good in my opinion? What's good in my world view? And so this is, I think, a very revealing character for justice. And so you can see the progression here from our way or path, going forward, guided by the inner vision of the heart, an individual person now, being kind to another person, and now me, thinking about what I think is good and right in the world. And then this is the character for ritual that doesn't have any particular significance in terms of giving us insight in it. So I'm not going to spend any time on that one, but since I was going down the list, I wanted you to see them. So hopefully that's kind of interesting and give you some insight into these layers of qualities in this chapter. Any comments or questions about this?
What kind of ritual would they be thinking of here?
So thank you. That's a really good question. The sense I get in the context of this chapter is a ritual. The next line of the chapter says ritual is the beginning of confusion. And so it suggests to me that ritual in this sense, in this context, means sort of a superficial ritual where, you know, somebody might think that going through certain motions, certain ritualistic motions have, you know, they're sort of putting the meaning in that. I, for one, love rituals. I have a lot of, you know, I like candles. I have a candle that I lit behind me here before we started tonight. I have my morning rituals when I get up of some qigong and meditation. And so I'm all for rituals. And I think they really enrich, this is my personal opinion, but I think they can really enrich our spiritual lives and sometimes create those connections with the sacred. But in this particular context, I think it's more about what we might think of as superficial rituals that have no real deeper meaning. Scott?
In the translation of the Tao Te Ching by Stephen Mitchell, he says, ritual is the husk of true faith, the beginning of chaos. You said confusion, but it's so it's the husk of true faith. So it's I guess what we do as a counterfeit, or instead of all the above, going all the way up to the Tao and goodness and morality and kindness.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of kind of understanding these, you know, these layers. Yeah, good. Thank you.
I think this is also polemics against Confucianism.
Oh,
The Tao and the De are the ideas of the Tao Te Ching, but Ren, Yi, and the humaneness, righteousness, and ritual are values that Confucius mentioned and stressed. So he's saying if you get away from the Tao, you're getting into, as Scott said, more the social, socially determined, rigidly done stuff that Confucianism was doing. Confucius thought that ritual was very important because the outer husk would help to move the inner person. But Lao Tzu's rejecting all of that here.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good observation, Joanne. And I like what you said about sort of the directionality of it, where Confucius seems to think we're going to start out here with a structure. We're going to have a structure of morality and, you know, rules of behavior and rules of relationship. And then that will create good people and a functioning society. And I think you're quite right, Joanne, that Taoism sort of goes the other direction. We're going to start inside and get ourselves internally aligned and in harmony with Tao and De, and then we'll be good people, right? You know, that will just sort of naturally, back to that Zuran, that's, you know, our true nature. That will not create good people as much as it will reveal the good people that we already are, according to our true nature. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction.
All kinds of thoughts about the New Testament discussion about law versus grace going through my head, but I won't go there right now because nothing's clearly formed, but it seems like that same sort of is the ritual, is the law and the ritual, you know, foundational and life flows from that, or are they just the icing on the cake where, you know, a true life of integrity, and then you put law and ritual on top of that, then then they're beneficial. But if you're totally controlled by law and ritual, then they're not. And so, yeah, it seems like the same sort of argument.
I think so. Yes, Scott.
I don't want to cut you off, but
Okay.
it does seem to me that you see this in some, I never saw this, and it kind of excites me. Lots of versus Confucius in that regard, because you see it all over the place. You know, once you see it in one place, Jesus seems to be more individual centered. I think you see that in how he tells the parable of the prodigal son, you know, so psychologically, compared with the Apostle Paul, who is all about structures and organization and everybody working together for the good of the individual. You know, I just spent 10 years in Utah, where you have a religion that was started by Joseph Smith, who had a certain kind of religious genius, but his religion would have ended up on the scrap heap, except for Brigham Young, who was the Apostle Paul, or the Confucius, who said, we can salvage this. Maybe we'll kill the original spirit, but I think I could run an empire out of it.
Yeah. I really like these connections you're making to different things in the Bible. And one of the things I thought about, and I wanted to really ask you all about what you think, is about fruits of the Spirit. Because there's two ways to think about that, right? And one way is sort of the Confucius way, maybe. So here's I had to look them up, but fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So one approach would be to say, I'm going to cultivate these qualities in myself. So I'm going to practice being loving, and I'm going to practice joy, and I'm going to cultivate these qualities in myself, and that's going to get me right with God. I'm not sure what the right phrase is there. And the other view might be, I'm going to surrender my ego to the Holy Spirit. I'm going to ask the Holy Spirit to fill me and to guide me. And if I am aligned, you can tell I love that word, I use it a lot. If I'm aligned with the guidance of the Holy Spirit, which is kind of like up here, if I'm aligned with the guidance of the Holy Spirit, then these fruits will naturally manifest. I don't have to manufacture them, but they will naturally express or manifest through me as the Holy Spirit moves and expresses through me. So it's kind of two views, at least. Anyway, that's kind of how I've been thinking about it. What do you all think about that? Are you a cultivator or a manifester? Am I off base with that?
No.
Yes, Janet.
Well, it would seem to me it's kind of the same. Either you cultivate your alignment with God, in which case the fruits of the Spirit would become manifest, or you begin at the other end and become a more spiritually focus on your spiritual gifts, and through that you will become more closely aligned with God. So I don't see it as either or.
Okay. I love that answer because it's this answer, isn't it? I love that. Thank you for couching it that way, because this takes us right back to this. They're not mutually exclusive, right? They can work together. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
I think it's it's a good question. I can remember having that question in high school Bible study, 100 years ago. So, what is a fruit of the Spirit? Is it a result of being a spiritual person, or is it something that you have to try to cultivate. And
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty ambiguous, I think, as Paul leaves it.
May really be a vegetable.
It brings to mind, to me, I think, and churches are strong for this reason, that people maybe tend to go one way or the other, be more spiritually minded, or the concept of we are God's hands on this earth and we better go do God's work and just go get it done. And you know, I think strong churches have both, you know, both types of people, and that kind of goes with
Yeah.
to make a whole.
Right. Thank you. Anything else?
I do think
Yes.
for Paul, there was probably the sort of negative flip side of that, which is also a theme of the New Testament, which is like, if you're dealing with people that don't show these characteristics, then they ain't coming from the right place.
Oh, that's interesting, huh? Sort of like a litmus test.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
And there are several places in the New Testament that says things like, you know, if people aren't, if you're not loving one another, then you're not in the right place.
Huh. Donna?
You know, from a very everyday aspect of this, I keep thinking back to my experience teaching young children. And there are many ways of going about it. But when you try to fit a child, especially a child new to school, first, second, third grade, into a set of rules, a set of this is the way that you will do it, versus letting a child discover by guidance their possibilities. It sounds kind of woo-woo, but it really does seem to make a difference if you can, I found if you can respect the possibilities of that child and help them grow that way, rather than expecting them to fit into that box that we've already prescribed for them.
Thank you. That's a very good example, a very concrete example of how this can play out. I bet you were a great teacher. Anything else? All right. So we've talked about these layers and some of these key concepts, and some of us, me included, I like to have something to practice. So there is one chapter in the Tao Te Ching, and it's interesting because it's the only chapter in the Tao Te Ching that uses the character for practice. And I gave Kathy, it's chapter 52, and I gave Kathy a little passage from that to show you all. Actually, not a passage, just some words from it. Yeah.
You see it?
Yeah, everybody got it? Okay, so the terms down the left side are actually from the chapter. The right side is kind of my interpretation of it. So in this chapter that actually uses this character for practice, it's got 4 things that it names. So one is to close the mouth. And there are other places in the Tao Te Ching that talk about, you know, like don't talk so much. And just listen more, talk less, that kind of idea. So there's definitely a preference in the Tao Te Ching for listening more than you're than you're speaking. So there's the close the mouth. And I thought, well, it's a little bit more gentle perhaps to just think about quietness, to be quiet and to listen. You can think about meditation or, just like I spend a lot of time sitting by the creek, that kind of thing. Just being quiet and not talking so much. All right, the next one is not interfering. We kind of talked about that a little bit with Wu Wei and with Zuran. The corollary to that to me is allowing, just allowing things to be the way they are. And one of the things I think is very interesting about the word interfere is that if you don't look at the word and somebody just says it out loud and you hear it, it's enter, E-N-T-E-R, fear, F-E-A-R, to interfere. And I think a lot of our impulses sometimes to interfere, to meddle, to interfere, come from entering fear. I'm in a place of fear and anxiety, and so I want to get out of here and I want to fix it so that I will feel better, right? So that idea of interfering in the sense of meddling and entering fear, becoming fearful, I think are very, not always, but I think are often very connected. And the other side of that of not entering fear is to be comfortable with allowing things to, to take their natural course and to express their true nature. The third practice is to see the small. Some translations say to see the insignificant. And to me, that just means to pay attention and to just look and to see what's around you. Sometimes when I'm sitting by the creek at the cabin, I notice the bugs. Sometimes there are these bugs kind of skimming along the water, or they're coming in and out of shadows, and like they'll go into a shadow and I can't see them, and then they'll come out into the sunlight and I can see them. Sometimes they're very, very tiny things while I'm sitting there that I start to notice that if I were just kind of walking by or not really paying attention, I wouldn't see. So that's the third practice. The fourth one is my favorite, and the characters really do say this: abide in tenderness. And I'm telling you, every time I read that, it just touches my heart. I want to do that, right? I want to just abide in tenderness all the time. So to me, that's kind of a way of saying to practice compassion and to allow our hearts to be open to the feelings and the needs of other people and to connect to people. To call in, right? Instead of to call out, right? Calling in to me would be a practice in compassion where I'm trying to connect with you and to understand and to reach across maybe some kind of, barrier in viewpoints to connect with you and to understand you. And then maybe you can also, hear me as well. So, I love that calling in concept. I'm gonna remember that one, and I think that's an exercise in compassion. So these are practices that we can engage in as we go through our days. We can look for opportunities to try one or all of these. But that abiding in tenderness would definitely be top of my list for things to practice. Thank you, Kathy. You can take that off. Any questions or comments about those practices? All right. Okay, so I saved something if we had some time, and I think we do. We can go till a little bit after 8, is that correct? Okay. Oh, you're gonna love this. Just wait. Let me get a piece of paper here. All right. So Taoism, we've talked about the mystical aspect of it. We've talked about the practical aspect of it. There's another aspect of Taoism that is really integral to it. And that is the internal balance, sort of physical piece to it. When we were talking last week, I said that many of you maybe have encountered aspects of Taoism without even really realizing it. And I asked you if any of you had practiced Tai Chi or Qigong, or maybe had an acupuncture treatment. All of these things are connected to these principles of Taoism and the idea that our bodies reflect this same kind of harmony and balance that we see in nature. And so health and balance and sort of everything in our body working together is a very fundamental part of Taoism. It doesn't mean that you have to go practice Tai Chi or Qigong, but there are other ways that we can just become, what's the word I'm looking for? Self-aware or sensitive to how these energies within our bodies work in harmony and balance each other. So we're not going to do any Tai Chi or Qigong tonight. I know you're really disappointed, but we'll do that another time. You let me know. We'll meet up and we'll do some of that. But two of the aspects of Taoism that are present in certain medical systems. So, for example, acupuncture works on this concept of meridians of energy in our body, and that some places in some of these channels of energy, the qi, the energy can get blocked. And acupuncture finds little places where maybe these meridians or these channels are not flowing, right? Here's our water piece there, not flowing smoothly, and tries to open those up. We're not going to do acupuncture tonight. The other thing, I know, it's like everybody's getting their little needles out. The other thing that is fundamental to a Chinese health system is this idea of 5 elements. And we have 5, according to the system, we have 5 major organ systems. And each system, so it's not like we have isolated organs. It's not like I have heart and I have lungs and whatever, but that each organ represents an entire energy system within our bodies, and they all work together. So what I'd like to do, if you're willing to give it a try, I hope you are. If you don't want to try it, that's okay. You can just listen and think about something else. I'm going to just talk you through the 5 elements that are associated with 5 organ systems. We're not going to do anything really crazy here, so yeah, don't get scared. And you can do it as a meditation, but you don't have to. So it's okay to keep your eyes open. We're just going to kind of go through these organ systems, and I'm going to tell you some of the harmonies and balanced associations with these organ systems. Okay? All right? Gonna try it? Okay. Oh, you're so brave. All right, so we're going to start with our lungs. And lungs, and so as I say, an organ, you can just think about it. You can put your hands on it. You can just feel the breath moving into it. Just bring your attention to that organ. So you don't really have to do anything with it, but just bring your attention to that organ. Okay? So we're going to start with our lungs. The element that is associated with the lungs is metal, right? And there's all these associations with each of these systems. The color is white. The season is autumn. So it's kind of a gathering energy, like a harvest energy in our lungs. And each of these organ systems has a pairing of emotions. And that's the part I really wanted to share with you, because it's really kind of interesting. And it's not, this is just what we were talking about with Yin Yang. It's not that the emotions are opposites that, are opposing each other, but they're complementary emotions that are balanced in the energy of that particular organ system. So in the lung organ system, the balancing emotions are sadness and courage. Sadness and courage. Okay. So I'm just going to be quiet for a second. Just take a couple of breaths. Think about your lungs. Just bring some loving energy to your lungs. White light. Balance. Great. All right. Each system, there's two ways to move through the organs. We're going to take this one direction that goes through what's called a creative cycle. So the next organ system after lungs is kidneys. So if you know where your kidneys are, they're in your back, kind of right under your rib cage, on either side of your spine, right in the back. Kidneys in the Taoist system, this is where your energetic action is. So healthy qi in your kidneys, like that's what you really want. So you really want to be very kind to your kidneys and give them some love there back in the back, because our other organs we think of as kind of being more in the front. So our kidneys are back here. And guess what the element is? I bet you can guess water, right? So water is the element in the kidneys. The color is blue, a dark blue, sometimes described even as black, very dark blue. The season is winter, so fall, right, moves into winter. Metal, you think, how does metal create water? Some of them are a little bit more clear, but you think about maybe water condensing on cold metal. So metal can sort of draw water out of the air and create water in that way. The two balancing emotions in the kidneys are fear and stillness. And I love that particular pairing, because I think when I'm afraid, often what I want to do is move, right? The fight or flight, that kind of idea. But here it's the balancing emotion to fear is stillness. Can I be still? Can I just sit with my fear and not be afraid of my fear? Can I get to know it and abide in tenderness with it, right? So those are the balancing emotions with fear. With kidneys. Water creates wood, right? Because then the trees grow from need the water in the earth, and that's associated with our livers. Do you know where your liver is? It's down on your right side, right up underneath your ribs, right at the base of your ribs. It's great big right there. So your liver is down here on your right side, and its element is wood. The color is green. You can guess what the season is because it's going to come after winter. It's spring. And the balancing emotions are anger. So if you're feeling some anger and you want to try to sort of lessen the intensity of that, start paying attention to your liver. Breathe into your liver. And the balancing emotion is confidence, because anger often is a cover for fear, right? It makes us feel more powerful than, being afraid. So we can balance that with some confidence in ourselves and trust in ourselves. All right, so there's our liver, wood, green, spring, okay? Then wood feeds fire. You can guess what organ that is. We're in our heart now. So now we're in the heart with fire, summer. And the balancing emotions are agitation, because fire, can be very agitated, and joy. Also love, you could have predicted. So joy and love balanced with agitation. Think about fire, can be very agitated, but also can be very cheery and warming and give us light. Okay, so there's our heart. And fire creates earth because it creates ash that goes into the earth. So our last organ system is the spleen, which is over now on our left side, over on our left at the base of our ribs there, okay? Spleen has the element of earth and the color yellow. And what season could that be? Because now we've been through 4 seasons. So the spleen is associated with kind of the in-between, and most often associated with late summer, that shift from summer into fall. But really can be between any of the seasons, but most specifically from summer into fall. And the energy of the spleen is balance, right? So it's a balancing organ system. So if you're feeling generally unbalanced, off center, out of sync, love your spleen and send some good energy there to help it out, right? And it'll help you. And the balancing emotions there are worry and compassion. Okay. So we're just going to take one breath I'm just going to name the organs, and we're just going to circle through those organs with just one or two breaths with each one. Yes, Sandra.
What color is fire or the heart? Is it red?
Oh, it's red. I'm sorry. Yes, did I skip that? Thank you. Thank you for catching that. All right.
Okay.
Yes, it's red. Okay.
Thanks.
Good. Did I forget anything else? Did I get all the other things? Okay. So I'm going to just say the name of the organ. We'll take a couple of breaths, and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay. All right. So, lungs. Kidneys. Liver. Heart. Spleen. Good. Everybody is now internally harmonized, internally balanced. Everything's working together. It's great. So that's what I've got for tonight. Any questions, comments?
I thought you might want to talk a little bit. You sent me a link to your new book.
Yeah.
And also your website.
Sure.
And I posted those in the chat, but I thought you might just want to take a minute to talk about your writing and what you do on your blog, and just share a little bit of that.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. So, yes, I have a website, and when I'm online, all my online and published works are in a pen name, Galen Pearl. So when you go there, you won't see Beth Enos, you'll see Galen Pearl, that's me. So don't get thrown by that. So on my website, I have a blog, and I write about some of the things we've talked about. I write about Taoism, I write about martial arts, I put some poetry on there, anything else that sort of catches my attention. So there's a lot of different kinds of things on the blog. If you go and you like the blog, you can sign up. There's a little box, and you can put your email in there, and then you'll get email notices of new blog posts. And I post something once a week, sometimes twice a week, something like that. So that's the website. And then as of just a couple of days ago, I have a new book, my second book, and it's now available on Amazon. So it's called I Speak to All Just So. And it's a collection of prayers and responses that I wrote over a number of years using a non-dominant hand writing method. So I would write the prayer with my dominant hand, which is my right hand, and then I would put the pen in my left hand, and my left hand would write a response. So if that intrigues you, you can go take a look at the Amazon link, and it will give you some more information about the book. I'll also add that all the proceeds from the book are donated to North Pole Studio, which is a nonprofit here in Portland. It's an art studio for artists with developmental disabilities. And it's a small little operation. They're just super. I have two sons with autism, and they both go to this art studio. It's just sweet, and they love going there and doing their art. And they have a number of artists there that are really quite remarkable, and they have art shows from time to time and all of that. So if you do go to the blog, my current post that I just put up this morning is announcing the book, and I've got a link to North Pole Studio, or you can just Google them. But anyway, it's just a way I'm trying to support them. So, all right, thank you for letting me get in there and self-promote.
Great.
you.
Beth, you're a wonderful teacher, and I'm
Yeah, you are.
so
Thank
glad
you.
you've been part of this. This has been great.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure your path with Southminster's will cross again. We will find a way to do this again. So
Well, I will look forward to that. You all are just an awesome group, because I'll tell you, I love talking about this stuff. So boy, if I can find some people who will engage with me and talk with me about it, this makes me a happy person. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
So Joanne Wakeland has asked for your contact info here, I think. So could you
Yeah, I don't,
put
where
that
is
in-
it?
Could you put that in the chat before you
Yeah.
go? That'd be great.
Yes.
Kathy, can you do that? I put that in last time. My email is enos.beth@gmail.com, but you can also email me through the website.
Well, I said that because Kathy had said she posted your book and blog in the chat, but I don't see.
Oh, you don't see it?
Oh, maybe
Oh.
I did it before you logged on.
Yeah, I think.
So maybe
I
you
think
don't
I'm-
see it. I'll do it right now again.
Yeah,
but
please do it
also-
again, Kathy.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I see it here, but
But also, I will also put it on the Southminster Connections page when I post the recording.
okay. And I'm putting my email back in here again too, so.
Great.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've really appreciated you've really taken this in a lot of different directions. And I'm curious about, if anybody has any further words that they want to share with Beth before she goes about something in the last 2 weeks that maybe really resonates with you, or not to put anyone on the spot. I thought it was interesting the way that you divided it into the different, the practical, and then more spiritual and
Mysterious. Yeah.
experience. And I liked that organization. That worked for me. But
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Joanne, next week we've got one more session.